150. Oh. 151. There was a young girl of Des Moines whose cunt could be fitted with coins, till a guy from Hoboken went and dropped in a token, and now she rides free on the ferry. What? 1948 doesn't rhyme, but it's still clever. 152. To his bride said the keen-eyed detective, "Can it be that my eyesight's defective? Has the east tit the least bit, the best of the west tit? Has the east bit the least bit, the best of the west tit, or is it the faulty perspective?" 1941 to 1942. 1953. There was a young girl of Detroit who at fucking was very adroit. She could squeeze her vagina to a pinpoint or finer, or open it out like a quoit. That was more Chicago. I don't know a Detroit accent. 1926. Oh, it keeps going. And she had a friend named Durand, whose cock could contract or expand. He could diddle a midge or the arch of a bridge. Their performance together was grand. My, how talented people are with their genitalia. Oh, it's lovely, the coffee in the morn, or afternoon for most people. 155. There was a young man of devises, whose balls were of different sizes. His tool, when at ease, hung down to his knees. Oh, what must it be when it rises? I bet it's quite a size. 1927 to 1941. Oh, it looks like Latin. Visi staret huic geminarum, disparmodis testicularum, minor haec nihili palma triplici, gem feceret altera clarum. Well, I see testicularum, so that must be testicles, so it must be still this, a naughty one. 1941. 157. There was a young fellow whose dong was prodigiously massive and long. On each side of this wang 2 testes did hang, that attracted a... That attracted! It turned into, what's her name? Oh, you know, the sex therapist. That attracted a curious throng. I turned into Ruth Westheimer. There was a young fellow whose dong take 3. There was a young fellow whose dong was prodigiously massive and long. On each side of this wang 2 testes did hang, that attracted a curious throng. Oh, I chopped my way through that one. 1942. 158. There was a young man from East Woobly, whose cock was bifurcated doubly. Each quadruplicate shaft had 2 balls hanging aft, and the general effect was quite lovely. Never heard bifurcated used so well in a sentence. 1947 to 1941. While I, with my usual enthusiasm, was exploring in Ermintrude's boozusium, she explained, "They are flat. But think nothing of that. You will find that my sweet sister, Suzusium." I will find that your sister Suzusium what? 1943, I don't think that was very rewarding. 170. There was a young fellow of Harrow, whose John was the size of a marrow. He said to his tart, "How's this for a start? My bowls are outside in a barrow." 1941. 171. There was a young fellow named Harry, had a joint that was long, huge, and scary. He pressed it on a virgin, who without any urging immediately spread like a fairy. Oh, in a perfect world. Perfect world, perfect world. 1943. 172. There was a young girl named Heather, whose twitcher was made out of leather. She made a queer noise which attracted the boys by flapping the edges together. Oh, I think I like that. 1945. C. 173. There was an old curate of Hestion, who'd erect at the slightest suggestion, but so small was his tool, he could scarce screw up spool, and a cunt was quite out of the question. Poor. Poor curate. Uh, 174. There was a young man from Hong Kong who had a trifurcated prong. A small one for sucking, a large one for fucking, and a honey for beating a gong. That's funny. 1942. A 173. Oh, 175, pardon me. A fellow whose surname was Hunt trained his cock to perform a slick stunt. This versatile spout could be turned inside out like a glove and be used as a cunt. Well, I guess he could go fuck himself. 1942. 176. Alas for the Countess Désert, whose muff wasn't furnished with hair, said the Count, quelle surprise, when he parted her thighs. Magnifique, pour un passe de la guerre. Magnificent you can pass as a child, or you can pass it into it easily. I don't speak any foreign languages except, well, Pig Latin, maybe. 1941. 177. A highly aesthetic young Jew had eyes of a heavenly blue. The end of his dilly was shaped like a lily, and his balls too utterly two. 1941. 178. There once was a lady from Kansas whose cunt was as big as bonanzas. It was 9 inches deep and the sides were quite steep. It had whiskers like General Carranza's. 1927 to 1932. 179. Oh, pity the Duchess of Kent. Her cunt is so dreadfully bent. The poor wench doth stammer. I need a sledgehammer to pound a man into my vent. 1939. 180. There was an old gent from Kentucky who boasted a filigreed schmuck, but he put it away for fear that one day he might put it in and get stuck. Well, that's rather practical of him. 1952. 181. There was an old lady of Curie whose cunt was a lusus naturae. The introitus vaginae was unnaturally tiny, and the thought of it filled her with fury. Ooh. That's very complicated. 1941. 182. There was a young fellow named Kimball, whose prick was exceedingly nimble, but fragile and slender, and dainty and tender, so he kept it encased in a thimble. 1941, 183. There was a young man of Lahore, whose prick was 1 inch and no more. It was all right for keyholes and little girls' pee-holes, but not with a dam with a whore. 1927 and 1941. 184. There once was a horse named Lily, whose dingus was really a dilly. It was vaginoid duply and labial quadruply. In fact, he was really a filly. That's a good one. 1944 to 50. Who cares? 185. There was a young fellow from Leeds who swallowed a package of seeds. Great tufts of grass sprouted out of his ass and his balls were all covered with weeds. 1938, 1952. I may stop reading these years because they're, they're old. They're old. They're from the olden times. 186. The wife of young Richard of Limerick complained to her husband, "My quimrick still grows in diameter each time that you ram at her. How can your poor tool stay so slimrick?" 187. There was a young lady of Lincoln who said that her cunt was a pinkin. Let's start again. There was a young lady of Lincoln who said that her cunt was a pinkin, so she had a prickle enter which turned it magenta, this artful old lady of Lincoln. Very artful. The coffee's so tasty. 188. There was a young girl of Llewellyn whose breasts were as big as a melon. They were big, it is true, but a cunt was big too, like a bifocal full-color aerial view. Oh, it keeps going. Like a bifocal full-color aerial view of Cape Horn in the Straits of Magellan. Let's go from the top again. There was a young girl of Llewellyn, whose breasts were as big as a melon. They were big, it is true, but her cunt was big too. Like a bifocal full-color aerial view of Cape Horn in the Straits of Magellan. 1941. 189. A contortionist hailing from Lynch used to rent out his tool by the inch. A foot cost a quid. He could, and he did, stretch it to three in a pinch. A contortionist hailing from Lynch used to rent out his tool by the inch. A foot cost a quid. He could, and he did, stretch it to 3 in a pinch. 190. There was a young man from Lynn whose cock was the size of a pin, said his girl with a laugh, and she felt his staff. Ooh, this won't be much of a sin. 191. There was a young girl named McCall, whose cunt was exceedingly small, but the size of her anus was something quite heinous. It could hold 7 pricks in one ball. I'd like to see that. 192. There was an old satyr named Mac, whose prick had a left-handed tack. If the ladies he loves don't spin when he shoves, their cervixes frequently crack. 193. An envious girl named McMeanus was jealous of her lover's big penis. It was small consolation that the rest of the nation of women were with her in weeness. They were wee too. 194. There was a young man named McNamator, with a tool of prodigious diameter. But it wasn't the size, gave the girls a surprise, but his rhythm, iambic pentameter. That's good, I like that. 195. There was a young man of Madras, whose balls were constructed of brass. When jangled together, they played stormy weather, and lightning shot out of his ass. 196. A bad little girl in Madrid, a most reprehensible kid, told her Tanty Louise that her cunt smelled like cheese, and the worst of it was that it did. That it did. I got excited. 197. There was a young man from Maine, whose prick was as strong as a cane. It was almost as long, so he strolled with his dong extended in sunshine and rain. It was an all-weather prick. 198. There was a young girl from Medina who could completely control her vagina. She could twist it around like the cunts that are found in Japan, Manchukuo, and China. 199. Almost sounds like a didgeridoo. There was a young fellow named Morgan who possessed an unusual organ. The end of his dong, which was 9 inches long, was tipped with the head of a gorgon. How about that? You don't see that every day. And here's 200. There was a young soldier from Munich whose penis hung down past his tunic, and their chops girls would lick when they thought of his prick, but alas, he was only a eunuch. So sad. Too bad, so sad. Yeah.